The distress beacon did not scream, it whispered. It arrived at relay station RAS-7 as a thin thread of compressed data, half-eaten by 3 days of signal decay, bouncing off dead satellites and ancient compact infrastructure that nobody had bothered to upgrade in 40 years. The duty officer on station was a Drenathi named Vur. He had 4 arms, gray-green skin, and the permanent expression of someone who had eaten something mildly unpleasant. He had been on RAS-7 for 11 months. Nothing ever happened at RAS-7. He almost deleted it. The automated system flagged it as low priority, origin unknown, sender unverified, signal integrity at 19%. But something in the header made Vur pause. A Celari civilian frequency, old format, emergency tier. He ran the decryption. The data that came out was not complete. It was fragments, pieces of a longer message stitched together by whatever automated system had sent it. But the pieces were enough. Orbital bombardment confirmed. Ground forces landed. Civilian casualties in the hundreds of thousands. The world named in the header was Nessala Prime. Vur sat very still for a moment. Nessala Prime was not some unnamed colony. It was the heart of the Celari Confederation. 12 billion people. A world that had been a compact member for over 200 years. A world that was supposed to be safe. He ran a check on the Volkai diplomatic status. The files confirmed what everyone knew. The Volkai Empire and the Celari Confederation were in arbitration talks, a trade dispute, low tension, no military buildup detected. The files were 3 weeks old. Vur contacted Compact Command immediately. The response took 6 hours normal processing time, nothing urgent, and told him that the nearest compact response fleet was 14 days away at standard travel speed. A formal assessment would be issued within 48 hours. He was to log the signal and await further instruction. He logged the signal. Then, because Compact Emergency Protocol Article 7 required notification of all member states, he forwarded it down the list. Most of the responses would go to automated inboxes. Most would be read by junior officers who would forward them upward through their own slow bureaucracies. He sent it to the United Earth Fleet's regional command as well, almost as an afterthought. Humans had been Compact members for only 40 years. They had a small fleet and limited territory and were generally considered a minor presence. But protocol was protocol. He did not expect much. What he got was a response in 40 minutes. Not a reply, not an acknowledgement. A direct channel request from the UEF 3rd Combined Fleet, flagged urgent, asking for the original signal data, all sensor logs, and the complete Volkai diplomatic file. Vur sent everything. He was not sure why. Something in the speed of the request made his secondary heart beat a little faster. 3 hours after that, the UEF 3rd Combined Fleet's 17 vessels began moving out of their patrol pattern. He pulled the fleet record out of curiosity. 17 ships. The flagship was listed as the heavy carrier Perseverance. The fleet commander was Admiral Dara Osai, former commander of the Earth Orbital Defense Network, decorated in the Carrion border conflict 7 years prior. The fleet's last combat engagement was 2 years ago. They were supposed to be on a routine patrol rotation for another 4 months. They were not on patrol anymore. Vur watched the fleet's trajectory on his long-range sensors for a long time. They were heading for Nessala Prime, not at standard cruise speed. They were burning hard, past the recommended drive limits for sustained travel. At this rate, they would cut 11 days down to 6. They would also use significantly more fuel than their patrol resupply allocation allowed. This would require a formal request for emergency resupply authorization, which would need to go through 3 separate compact departments. He checked the fleet's filed flight plan. There was no filed flight plan. They had simply left. He sent an urgent follow-up to Compact Command, flagging the human fleet's unauthorized departure from patrol zone. The response, when it came 8 hours later, told him to observe and report and take no action at this time pending formal assessment. By then, the human fleet was already 4 hours deep into the burn. Vuer looked at the original signal data again. He pulled up a Celari cultural reference file, something he kept in his personal database from his years as a diplomatic attaché. He found what he was looking for, a photograph of Nessala Prime's capital taken from orbit on a clear day. White towers, green parks, a river delta that turned gold in the afternoon light. He looked at it for a long time. Then he requested a transfer to the Perseverance as an official compact liaison observer. The request went through faster than he expected. The human admiral approved it personally within the hour. He had just enough time to pack one bag before the shuttle came. He did not know, climbing the docking ramp, that he was walking toward the most frightening thing he had ever witnessed. He did not know that in 6 days he would stand on a human warship and watch a species that had barely left its own solar system 40 years ago take apart the largest Volkai invasion fleet ever assembled. He just knew that something was happening, something the compact, slow machinery was not built to handle. And the humans had not waited to be told it was their problem. That, more than anything, was what made his secondary heart beat fast. The first thing Vuer noticed about the Perseverance was the smell. Not a bad smell, just a specific one, something faintly metallic, layered under the recycled air, with a hint of something biological that he could not quite name. He would later learn it was the combination of human sweat, the particular oil they used on mechanical parts, and the coffee they drank in quantities that would give most species heart failure. But in the first hour, he just noticed that the ship smelled lived in. Deeply, thoroughly lived in, as if the crew had been here so long that the ship had absorbed them. He was given quarters near the observation deck, small but clean. A human ensign named Bex, young, freckled, relentlessly cheerful, showed him the layout and told him to ask if he needed anything. Vuer asked what the noise was, a low, rhythmic vibration he could feel in the floor. Bex thought about it. The drives are at 112%, she said. We do not usually run that hard. You get used to it. Then she smiled and left. Vuer did not get used to it. He made his way to the observation lounge because he had nothing else to do and because the compact liaison role officially was to observe. The lounge had a long curved window facing the direction of travel. Stars moved wrong at this speed, slightly stretched at the edges. 3 humans were already there. 2 junior crew members playing some kind of card game and a man sitting alone at the far end, reading a physical book. A physical book. On a warship burning at maximum drive capacity toward an active conflict zone. The man with the book noticed Vuer, nodded once, and went back to reading. Vuer later learned his name was Captain Rowan Adler, commander of the heavy cruiser Resolute, traveling with the fleet for a joint coordination exercise that had just become something else entirely. That afternoon, Vuer attended the fleet-wide tactical briefing in the Perseverance's command center. He had attended military briefings before. Compact briefings were formal, structured, and careful. They involved projected casualty models, diplomatic option trees, and at least 3 separate subcommittees of analysis. This briefing lasted 20 minutes. Lieutenant Commander Orion Baez, young, sharp-eyed, with the look of someone who had not slept in a day and did not intend to sleep for another, put the Volkai fleet projection on the main screen. 207 vessels confirmed by the last available sensor data. Ground forces landed on 3 continents. Orbital bombardment had stopped, which meant either the ground campaign was advanced enough that they did not need it anymore, or they were saving power. Neither option was good. He then put up the UEF fleet composition, 17 ships. Nobody in the room reacted to this comparison. That was the part that Vuer found strangest. No hesitation, no visible concern. One officer asked about fuel reserves. Another asked about drone intercept ratios. A third asked whether the Volkai used decentralized command architecture or a high priority system. Baez answered each question. Admiral Osai listened and asked 2 questions of her own, both about timing. Vuer raised his hand and noted, formally, that the UEF fleet did not have compact authorization for offensive engagement. Osai looked at him with the patient expression of someone who had already considered this. She said that they were responding to a distress signal under Article 7 of the Compact Emergency Response Charter, which required no prior authorization. They were not an offensive fleet. They were a rescue mission. Vuor said that Article 7 was written for medical ships. Osai said, yes, but it does not specify ship type. The briefing moved on. Later, unable to sleep, Vuor wandered toward the cargo level. He heard them before he reached the bay doors, not shouting, not weapon fire, just movement. A controlled, rhythmic sound of people moving fast in a confined space. He looked through the bay window. Staff Sergeant Priya Nanda's Marine platoon was running drills. Full kit. Zero-gravity simulation panels in the floor creating unpredictable footing. They moved through a mock corridor structure in teams of 4, breaching doors, clearing corners, covering each other's movement in silence broken only by hand signals and the occasional clipped word. Nobody was watching them. No officer standing at the side with a clipboard. They were doing this because they had decided to do it. Vuor watched for a long time. On day 4 of the transit, a second signal arrived from Nesala Prime, weaker, more damaged, but the voice in it was clear. Her name, the translation software identified, was High Architect Tessava. Her title meant something close to Chief Civilian Administrator. She gave coordinates. She described her location, a deep infrastructure bunker beneath the capital, shielded by 5 meters of reinforced stone. She reported approximately 2,000 civilians sheltering with her. She described the sound she could hear through the walls, distant, rhythmic, the sound of Voakai excavation drones working methodically through the city above. At the end of the signal, she said, "Please hurry, they are not finished here." Then the signal cut out. Admiral Osai played it once for the senior staff. Nobody spoke when it ended. Osai said, "We pushed the drives to 115, then she walked out." Vuor stood in the empty briefing room after everyone else had gone. He thought about what he had seen over 4 days. The calm, the preparation, the complete absence of the panic or hesitation that he would have expected from a small fleet about to engage a force 10 times their size. He thought about the card game in the observation lounge, about the physical book, about Priya Nanda's platoon drilling in silence at 2 in the morning with no one watching them. He opened a channel to Compact Command. He did not know what to report. He eventually wrote, "The human fleet is proceeding. Crew morale assessed as high. Recommend you contact me after rather than before. I do not think they will be accepting instruction at this stage." He sent it and closed the channel. Outside the window, the stars stretched and hummed. Nesala Prime was still burning when they arrived. Not fire exactly, the planet was not on fire, but from the jump exit point at the system's edge, the long-range sensors showed heat signatures across 3 continents that should not have been there. Cities, industrial zones, power infrastructure, all of it glowing on the thermal display like embers in a cooling fireplace. The planet was alive, barely. What filled the space between the fleet and the planet was worse. Orion Baez read the sensor count aloud once, 241 vessels. Then he did not read it again, because saying it a second time would not change it, and there was work to do. The Volkai fleet sat in low orbit, spread across the planet's northern hemisphere in a pattern that Baez recognized from the intelligence files, post-conquest consolidation formation. They were not expecting a fight. They were sorting through what they had already won. Vuor, standing at the back of the command deck, looked at the display and felt something go cold in his chest. He had a small personal device on his wrist, a compact liaison communicator, standard issue. He could use it to formally advise the fleet to stand down pending compact authorization. He had the authority to do it. His hand did not move. Hive Commander Scrath received the proximity alert in the 3rd hour of his sleep cycle. His adjutant woke him with the data. 17 vessels, human configuration, emerged at jump distance. Scrath looked at the number. He thought about how the compact typically responded to military situations, with hails, with formal identification, with a request for mutual disengagement pending diplomatic resolution. He had navigated 3 compact interventions before. He knew the rhythm of it. He opened a broadcast channel to the human fleet. Standard compact hailing protocol. He identified his fleet, stated that Nesala Prime was currently under lawful military administration of the Volcae Empire under right of conquest, and invited the arriving vessels to identify themselves and state their intention. The human fleet did not respond. This was unusual but not alarming. Sometimes there were transmission delays. Sometimes junior officers needed time to connect their commanders. Scrath waited. His adjutant noted that the human ships had not slowed down. They were still moving at high speed on an intercept vector. This was perhaps more unusual. Scrath sent the hail again. He got his answer 14 seconds later, and it was not words. 4 mass driver projectiles, fired in sequence from the lead human vessel at a range most compact weapons did not consider viable for accurate fire. They were not aimed at any single ship. They were aimed at the densest cluster of Volcae vessels in the formation, a point where 11 ships sat within tight mutual support distance. The projectiles were solid ferrous slugs, no warhead, no guidance system after launch, just mass and velocity. 3 of the 4 connected. Not with the ships directly, they passed between hulls, but the shockwave pressure at that range, that speed, that density of nearby mass, cracked 2 hulls at their weakest stress points. 1 ship lost propulsion. 1 lost its forward weapons array. The 3rd projectile clipped a wing strut on a smaller patrol craft and sent it spinning. Scrath stared at his tactical display. In 20 years of command, no one had opened a battle by shooting at empty space between his ships. There was a reason for this. It was wasteful, imprecise, and indicated either desperation or a fundamental misunderstanding of weapons physics. His tactical officer, K. Arath, said quietly, "Commander, they calculated blast pressure dispersion from the projectile transit. They were not trying to hit the ships. They were using the ships as targets to generate the shockwave." Scrath looked at K. Arath for a moment. Then he ordered full combat formation and began issuing counterinstructions. The problem was that the human fleet had not stopped moving while he issued orders. They had split, not into 2 groups, which was the standard compact pincer formation, but into 4, each group taking a different orbital angle around the planet using the system's inner asteroid belt as partial cover. Scrath had 241 ships. He had not needed to think carefully about positioning in quite some time. Now he had 17 ships moving from 4 different directions, and he was realizing, with a cold clarity that felt very unlike his usual command experience, that he did not know which group to respond to first. On the Perseverance, the command deck was very quiet. Osai stood at the tactical table. She did not raise her voice. She did not move much. She pointed at the display occasionally and said things like, "Shift group 215 degrees and let them come to us, and tell Resolute to hold that angle, do not advance yet." Baez relayed the orders. The fleet moved. Vuer watched her face. He was trying to find the thing he expected to see there: tension, excitement, the particular brightness in the eyes that he had observed in other species when violence was imminent. He did not find it. She looked like someone doing careful, detailed work, the kind of concentration you put on a problem that requires your full attention. The first Volcae counterstrike came from their drone swarms. Thousands of small autonomous weapons platforms launched simultaneously toward the approaching human groups. Standard doctrine: overwhelm point defense with numbers, get the drones close enough to detonate near hull sections. Osai had expected this. She had positioned the fleet's 2 electronic warfare ships at the outer edges of the formation, specifically for this moment. The drones relied on Volcae carrier wave signals for targeting updates. The Yield ships began broadcasting a disruption pattern that the intelligence files said should affect Volcae drone targeting by roughly 40%. The disruption affected it by 63%. Baez noted this quietly. Osei said, "Good, update the model, keep moving." Vuer found Rowan Adler beside him at some point. He was not sure when the captain had arrived on the command deck. Adler was watching the tactical display with an expression of focused attention. He had his arms crossed. He looked, Vuor thought, like someone watching a very complex game they had played many times before. Vuor said, "They sent 241 ships. We have 17. Adler said, "Yes." Vuor said, "Are you not frightened?" Adler considered this honestly. He said, "A little. But they are in a fixed orbit and we are moving. Moving is always better than fixed." He said it the way someone might explain that hot things burn and cold things freeze. A simple fact of the world, learned early, never forgotten. Outside, the battle was just beginning. The Volkai had a concept in their military doctrine called the breaking point. Every species had one. Every military force, no matter how determined, would eventually reach a moment where the cost of continuing outweighed any possible gain. When a Volkai commander found that point through casualties, through resource depletion, through the psychological pressure of sustained losses, the enemy would stop. They would retreat or negotiate or simply collapse. This was not considered weakness in the Volkai framework. It was considered rational. The universe ran on cost-benefit. Everything broke eventually. Scrath spent the first 4 hours of the battle looking for the human breaking point. He did not find it. He found instead a series of events that he would later describe, in his tribunal testimony, as increasingly difficult to explain within normal tactical models. The human fleet took 2 significant hits in the second hour. The Perseverance's forward sensor array was destroyed by a lucky rail strike, and a smaller vessel called the Meridian lost engine power and drifted out of formation. Standard doctrine across every species Scrath had ever fought said that the fleet would tighten defensively around its damaged members and slow its advance. The Perseverance switched to secondary sensors and kept moving. The Meridian broadcast a distress call, and 2 crew members in a small repair shuttle went out to manually reconnect the engine coupling while the battle continued around them. They were outside the ship for 40 minutes. The battle did not stop for them. They did not stop for the battle. They finished the repair and the Meridian came back into formation. Scrath had ordered 3 separate waves of concentrated fire at the Meridian during those 40 minutes, because logic said that a crippled ship was the priority target. The repair shuttle kept moving between his weapons and the hull, not defensively, but because it was doing its job, and the job happened to put it in the way. His targeting systems logged it as a weapons platform for about 20 minutes before someone corrected the error. 2 human crew members in a repair shuttle had been misidentified as a weapons system because they refused to stop working during a battle. This, Scrath would later tell the tribunal, was when he first began to feel something he did not have a good word for in his own language. The closest compact standard translation was dread. 17 hours into the engagement, the tactical situation had changed considerably. The Volkai fleet had lost 63 ships. Another 40 were damaged to varying degrees. The human fleet had lost 2 ships, the Aldgate, which had taken a coordinated strike from 4 Volkai vessels simultaneously and broken apart in the second hour, and the Crestline, which had suffered a catastrophic reactor failure in hour 9 that the crew contained enough to evacuate before the ship was lost. The remaining 15 human ships were all damaged, some significantly. None of them had stopped. Scrath had attempted formal parley 3 times. The first time, no response. The second time, Admiral Ose opened the channel, listened to his opening statement, and then closed it again without speaking. The third time, the channel connected and a human officer, young, calm, sounding slightly tired, said, "We are not stopping. You can stop if you want." Then the channel closed. He had launched every drone wave his fleet carried. The human electronic warfare ships had adapted to each wave faster than his technicians could recalibrate. By the 7th drone deployment, the disruption was so effective that Scrath had stopped ordering them. They were expensive, and they were not working. He had tried withdrawing his fleet to higher orbit, forcing the humans to extend their approach vectors. The humans followed at the same speed. He had tried clustering his most heavily armored ships into a defensive shell around the command vessels. The humans stopped attacking the shell and instead targeted the supply chain ships at the formation's edge, one by one, until the shell was unsupplied. He had tried splitting his force into two halves to catch the human groups in a crossfire. SOS had anticipated this, or had guessed it, or had simply reacted faster than his plan could execute, and pulled her four groups into a single formation for 4 minutes, let the crossfire happen against empty space, and then split again into new angles before his ships could realign. She was playing the battle like someone who had done this before, in a body that knew how to absorb pain and keep moving, on a planet that had been trying to kill her species for 1,000,000 years and had only partially succeeded. At hour 11, Scrath did something he had never done before. He asked his adjutant Krath for a probability model on the engagement outcome. Krath ran the model. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Commander, if the trend continues, we will lose this engagement within 6 hours." Scrath looked at the display. 241 ships against 17. He had lost 63. They had lost 2. He said, "Run it again." Krath ran it again. She said, "The result does not change." On the ground below, things were also changing. The Volkai ground forces had been coordinated from orbit resupply runs, air support, targeting data from satellites. When the battle above began cutting into Scrath's orbital assets, ground coordination began to degrade. The first signs were subtle, delayed resupply drops, targeting data that was 6 minutes old instead of real time, air support that did not arrive. Then the signs became less subtle. 3 ground command vehicles lost their uplink entirely. Volkai infantry units in the capital district began receiving contradictory orders from 2 different command sources that could no longer synchronize. Staff Sergeant Priya Nanda and her platoon had been waiting for exactly this moment. They came down in a shuttle during hour 12 of the battle, using the sensor blind spot created by a destroyed Volkai relay satellite. 600 meters above the capital's ruins, in atmosphere thick with smoke, the shuttle running silent with its transponders off. They landed in a collapsed transit hub, oriented themselves in 30 seconds, and moved. Their target was a Volkai forward command post in what had once been a government district, a hardened building now bristling with communication equipment and staffed by the officers coordinating ground operations. Without it, the ground forces would go from poorly coordinated to completely blind. Priya's platoon hit it from 2 sides simultaneously, at a time when the garrison was rotating shift, a piece of timing that required knowing Volkai operational schedules, which intelligence had provided, and trusting that information, which was a choice. They cleared it in 22 minutes. 5 of her people were wounded. All 5 kept moving. Priya stood in the command center afterward, surrounded by her people and the wreckage of the post, and looked at the screens still showing the feeds from above. The battle in orbit looked like chaos from here, but she could see the pattern in it, the human ships moving like a school of fish around a much larger predator, never staying still, never attacking the same point twice. She said to nobody in particular, "Come on, Admiral." Above her, 15 battered ships continued their impossible work. At hour 16, Scrath opened a general broadcast to his fleet, "Prepare evacuation protocols." His adjutant said, "Commander." He said, "I know." He had run out of things to try. The gun stopped at hour 17 and 14 minutes. It did not happen cleanly. On a battlefield that large with that many ships, silence did not arrive all at once. It came in patches, a cluster of Volkai vessels broadcasting the formal white band frequency that signaled cessation of hostilities, then another, then a gap where 2 smaller Volkai patrol craft kept firing for 9 minutes because their command uplink was severed, and nobody had told them it was over. The Resolute absorbed 3 more hits before Adler's crew managed to establish a direct visual signal with the patrol craft, and they finally understood. When it was truly quiet, the tactical display showed 11 Volkai vessels still functional out of 241. Vuer stood at the back of the command deck and looked at that number for a long time. He had filed 12 reports to Compact Command during the 17 hours. 3 of them had been formal objections to unauthorized engagement. 2 had been requests for clarification on jurisdictional status. The most recent 7 had simply been observational logs, because at some point during Hour 8, he had run out of procedural things to say and had started writing down what he was actually seeing. He suspected those last 7 would be more useful to compact historians than anything else he had ever written. Osai's first order after the ceasefire was not about the ships, it was about the planet. She requested a full sensor sweep of Nessala Prime's surface, looking for heat signatures consistent with human-scale life in the bunker coordinates Tessava had transmitted. Baez ran the sweep in 3 minutes. Positive contact. 2,041 biological signatures in a shielded structure beneath the capital district. All alive. The second order was to deploy every medical shuttle the fleet had. The third order was to formally accept Scrath's surrender. Priya Nanda reached the bunker before the medical shuttles did. She found the entrance, a reinforced blast door set into the side of what had been a municipal water management facility, sealed from the inside. She knocked. She did not have a translation device good enough for Selari, so she knocked in a specific pattern, 3 slow, 3 fast, 3 slow. Not a code, just a rhythm that felt to her like the opposite of a weapon. There was a long silence from inside. Then the door opened 20 centimeters, held by a chain, and one enormous amber eye looked through the gap. Priya stepped back so the figure inside could see her full silhouette. She held her weapon at her side, pointing down. She spread her other hand open, palm forward. She was not sure if this gesture meant anything to Selari, but it was the best she had. The door closed. There was a sound of something being unlatched. Then it opened fully. High Architect Tessava was taller than Priya had expected, thin in a way that suggested recent weeks rather than natural build. Her feathers, the Selari had a fine layer of them across their shoulders and the back of their necks, she had read, were matted and dull. She stood straight anyway. She looked at Priya with the careful attention of someone assessing whether this was real or another thing to survive. Then she looked past Priya at the sky, where the smoke was still clearing but through which, if you looked at the right angle, you could see the distant shapes of human ships in orbit. She said something in Selari. Priya's earpiece gave her a rough translation, working from context and the limited vocabulary in the database. Something close to, "I did not believe you would come." Priya said, "We came." It was not a profound statement. It was the only one she had. Tessava looked at her for a moment more. Then she turned and said something to the people behind her in the bunker. There was a sound, a collective exhale, or something like one, a sound 2,000 people make when the thing they have been holding gets put down. They came out slowly. Some were injured, some were being carried. All of them looked at the sky. Some made a gesture with their hands, both palms pressed flat against their chests and then opened outward like releasing something. The Selari expression of profound gratitude Priya would learn later. In the moment, she did not know what it meant, but it did not need a translation. She stood at the entrance and counted them out, one by one, until the bunker was empty. Aboard the Perseverance, Scrath was brought to the meeting room off the main command corridor. He was unrestrained. He had expected restraints. He had expected, honestly, to be dead. The Volkai did not take commanders prisoner. They were either victorious or they were eliminated, because a defeated commander was a liability and a resource expenditure. He had spent his time since the surrender transmission preparing himself for the execution that logic said was coming. Instead, a human handed him water and left the room. He sat with the water for a long time, not drinking it, not sure what to do with it. Osai came in alone. She sat across from him without ceremony. She put a data tablet on the table between them and turned it so he could see. It showed the compact tribunal charter and a specific paragraph highlighted in the Volkai script that Baez had looked up. The protocol for transfer of war crimes defendants to international judicial authority. She said, "You will be transported to compact headquarters under standard prisoner conditions. You will stand before a tribunal. You will have access to legal representation. Scrath looked at the tablet. He looked at her. He said, "Why?" She said, "Because you surrendered and the surrender is being honored. Because killing you solves less than making you answer for this. Because the Selari deserve to see a court proceeding, not an execution." He said, "This is not how war ends." She said, "It is how we end it." He had no framework for her answer. He sat with it for a long time after she left. That evening, Vuer sat in the observation lounge and wrote his final report. He had been composing it in his head for 3 hours. When he finally typed it out, it was much shorter than he expected. He wrote, "The human fleet engaged a force of 241 Volkai vessels with 17 ships and ended the invasion of Nessala Prime. Civilian population confirmed preserved. Enemy commander taken alive for tribunal. Compact authorization was not obtained in advance. In my assessment, had it been sought, the answer would have arrived after the Selari Confederation ceased to exist. I am unable to find procedural language for what I observed. I am not certain procedural language is what this moment requires." He thought about adding more. He did not. He sent it and looked out the window at Nessala Prime below, its lights slowly coming back on, one district at a time, like someone carefully feeling their way home in the dark. 3 weeks after the battle, the Compact Council held a formal session about what had happened. It lasted 9 hours. The session was not broadcast publicly, but the minutes were eventually released, and those who read them noted that the words unauthorized, jurisdiction, and precedent appeared a combined 412 times. What the minutes did not record, because minutes do not record things like this, was the long, uncomfortable silence that followed when Compact Counselor Death of the Murani species asked, simply, "Would anyone at this table prefer that the Selari Confederation no longer existed as a member state?" Nobody answered. The session ended without a formal censure of the United Earth Fleet. The resolution that passed instead directed all Compact members to review their emergency response protocols within a period of 18 months. It was, in the careful language of the document, a forward-looking measure rather than a retrospective judgment. Tessava submitted her statement to the Council 12 days after the session. It was 11 pages long. She wrote it herself in Selari and then provided the Compact standard translation. She described the 6 days in the bunker, the sounds through the walls, the faces of the people with her, the moment when an elderly administrator named Furel had a heart episode and they had no medical equipment and she had held his hand and talked to him about his garden until the episode passed and he recovered. She described the moment the door opened and a human soldier had stood there with her weapon pointed at the ground. The last paragraph of her statement said, "I have been asked whether I believe the human fleet acted within the boundaries of Compact law. I am not a legal scholar. What I know is that I transmitted a signal into empty space on the 5th day of the invasion because I had nothing else to do. I did not believe anyone would come. I believed I was simply making a record so that if anyone found the bunker afterward, they would know what had happened here. The humans came in 6 days. The nearest Compact response fleet would have arrived in 14. I leave the legal question to those who enjoy legal questions. I know only what the mathematics say." Vuer testified before the Council's Emergency Response Subcommittee in person. He was a precise and careful speaker by nature. He had given testimony before in smaller proceedings and had always been thorough and measured. This time, a junior counselor asked him whether he believed the humans had been reckless. Vuer sat with the question. He said, "I watched a crew member repair an active engine coupling during a fleet engagement. I watched a Marine platoon run drills at 2 in the morning with no one supervising them. I watched Admiral Os accept a surrender and then spend 4 hours personally verifying that every civilian who had been in that bunker had received medical attention before she attended to anything administrative." He paused. "I do not think reckless is the correct word. I think they are very, very serious about certain things." The counselor asked, "What things?" Vuer said, finishing what they start, and making sure the right people survive it. The tribunal processing occupied a separate proceeding entirely. Scrath stood before a bench of 7 judges from 5 species, charged with crimes against civilian populations under the Compact's humanitarian statutes. His defense was limited. The records recovered from the captured Volkai command vessel showed the operational planning files for the Nessala invasion, 2 years of preparation, detailed casualty projections for the Selari population, resource extraction schedules. He did not deny the files. He said they were consistent with standard Volkai military doctrine and that he had acted within his mandate. The tribunal noted this in their proceedings and continued. The verdict took 3 months to reach. Life sentence, compact detention, no execution. The Volkai Empire formally protested this as insufficient. The compact noted the protest and filed it. Back on Nessala Prime, the rebuilding had started before the legal proceedings did. Human aid teams were among the first on the ground. They had logistics infrastructure, heavy lifters, portable fabrication units, field hospitals, that most compact aid organizations did not carry. They also had a quality that Tessava would later describe in an interview as difficult to translate. They were comfortable with mess. Most species found disaster environments psychologically difficult: the disorder, the visible damage, the absence of normal structure. Human aid workers walked into wreckage and immediately began sorting it. They did not need things to be clean before they could work. They had, she said, a very practical relationship with reality. There was friction, occasionally. Human communication styles were more direct than Selari social convention allowed for, and there were several incidents in the first 2 weeks where well-meaning human workers said something that caused unintentional offense. Priya Nanda's platoon, assigned to security for the capital district, resolved most of these by simply asking Selari elders how things should be done, and then doing them that way. This approach turned out to work quite well. Adler came down to the surface on the fleet's 18th day in the system, while final repairs were still ongoing on the Resolute. He walked through the aid distribution area in the capital, watching the human and Selari workers figure each other out in real time. A child found him. The Selari young were smaller than the adults in a way that was not proportional. Their heads were slightly too large, their movements slightly too unpredictable, in the universal manner of young things that had not yet grown into themselves. This one had feathers brighter than the adults, still showing the vivid patterns of youth. It climbed up onto the piece of broken wall where Adler was sitting and stared at him with the complete, unself-conscious attention that children have before they learn that starring is impolite. He offered it a piece of ration bar. It took the bar, smelled it, made an expression that required no translation, and handed it back. He laughed. It was not a complicated moment. There was no speech, no ceremony, no record of it in any official document. A human and a Selari child sitting on a broken wall in a city that was slowly, carefully, putting itself back together. The child eventually got bored and left to investigate something else. Adler finished his ration bar alone and looked at the sky. He wrote in his personal log that evening, "It is a strange thing to be very good at destruction. It makes the other part, the staying, the helping, the sitting on rubble with a child who doesn't trust your food, feel more important. Maybe it always was." 2 months later, the UEF 3rd Combined Fleet was formally recalled to its patrol rotation. The Compact sent a diplomatic delegation to see them off, something that had never happened before for a human fleet departure. Tessava came to the shuttle dock herself, which was also not protocol, and would have been considered presumptuous in normal circumstances, and nobody said anything about it. She stood at the dock and watched the shuttles load. Priya Nanda was the last one up the ramp. She stopped at the top and turned back. Tessava raised one hand, not the formal gratitude gesture, not any official gesture at all, just a hand raised. Priya raised hers back. Then the ramp closed and the fleet went home. The Compact's revised emergency response protocol was passed 14 months later. Article 7 was expanded to include any vessel capable of providing material assistance to a population under threat. The revision was called, in the official documentation, a clarification of existing language. Everyone understood what it meant. It meant, if you send the signal, someone will come. And if the someone is human, they will come fast, and they will not stop.